teenager. And when this occurred, and after this became public, there was an outcry from the Associated Press and from the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press saying, look, this is totally inappropriate. And James Comey, the now former FBI director, had written a letter to the New York Times saying, like, well, look, there are times when this is appropriate, but we do it in very rare occasions. And the overall message was that they do it for occasions when there is no better cover for cases that involve immediate public safety concerns. And I think in this case, the Bundy investigation, any crimes that had occurred had already happened, right? So there was no argument that this was a pressing public safety concern, and yet they used the undercover they used pretending to be journalists as their cover. And then the second question this raises is, like, what ultimate effect this has on journalists, right? Documentary filmmakers and journalists all the time are facing questions of, like, hey, are you guys maybe working for the government? Are you guys moles? And, like, now there's actually a case you can point to say, like, yeah, the government does this. And I think, at a time of unprecedented attacks by the government on the press and, unprecedented language to try to delegitimize the press, it's really concerning that the FBI is posing as journalists in a way that I think will, cause a chilling effect and make people who, might be concerned about whether a journalist or a documentarian is part of the government, they may shy away from working with that journalist for that reason.
Fascinating. And also, again, along the same lines as your book, The Terror Factory, even though they had this undercover documentary film crew, much of the information, it says in the article, much of the information that they found out, they could have found out just by going on these guys' Facebook pages, because the stuff they were saying they had already said in other interviews and on Facebook and social media and in public. Did they come up with anything new?
No, and so that's what's most fascinating, right? So you have 5 or 6 FBI agents who work on this for nearly a year, traveling to 5 different states, producing more than 100 hours of audio and video, and we can conclusively say that there was nothing in these audio and video recordings that they couldn't have found in other ways. Cliven Bundy and Ryan Bundy and Ammon Bundy and a lot of these supporters, they gave interviews to, mainstream press like local Las Vegas television stations and the Associated Press and others, as well as kind of more marginal press like, Pete Santilli's radio show. And, all of the information that the FBI was able to acquire through this fake documentary project, they basically could have acquired just by, like, Googling Cliven Bundy in Google videos and, watching what he said. Because the truth is that Cliven Bundy and the others did not say anything to the fake documentary crew that they had not said to dozens of journalists before. And the funny thing was, like, we mentioned this in the article, is that in Cliven Bundy's interview, when he's finally, when he's finally persuaded to sit down for the interview with the fake documentary crew, he basically says that. He says something to the effect of, this morning I've already talked to 2 radio stations and I've got a whiteboard where there's notes to talk to other journalists. And, what I really like is my ability to talk to journalists like you and tell the story. And to him, to Cliven, I don't think, I know he didn't think of these people as any different from any other journalist. And what's interesting is, like, he didn't tell them anything that was noteworthy or newsworthy or, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think anything incriminating, to be honest. And so they spent all this time, all this money, and, they really could have, built as much a case or acquired as much intelligence just by, looking at the video and radio interviews that Cliven and his supporters had already given.
Fascinating. This whole thing is just so fascinating. Now, has there been a hearing whether or not that all this footage would be admissible in court?
Yeah, so the case that ended with Greg Burleson and another man being convicted and 4 other defendants being acquitted, the judge did allow clips from the videos to be used. And in fact, the lead undercover agent, a guy who goes by the name Charles Johnson, testified for a day and a half about his activities there. And so they did allow those in. And now the 4 whose verdict ended in a hung jury are being retried starting June 26th. And my expectation would be that the government would use the video. They certainly are allowed to. There were several jurors after the last trial who were actually quoted in the Las Vegas papers, just saying that basically that they felt that the undercover video actually had the opposite effect. They felt it was intrusive and, did not prove anything criminal, and kind of proved the government's pressure or kind of desire to find ways to convict these people. And so it's possible that the government would choose not to use it for that reason. But I suspect that, given as much effort as they put into these audio and video recordings and the lack of other evidence otherwise, that they're likely to use it. And I would suspect that they would definitely use it for the trials of Cliven, Ryan, and Ammon Bundy, which will come later this year. In large part because, those are the main focuses of the documentary investigation or the fake documentary investigation. And so, they have lots of, video to work with on that. Cliven's lawyers and the lawyers for Cliven's son have argued that, this evidence should not be allowed because it was specifically established or created as a way of trying to find ways that they would say things that would incriminate themselves. And, each of their interviews is hours long. And, ultimately what the government will show the jury will be, clips of a few minutes here and a few minutes there. And their lawyers have argued that that's unfair. It should not be allowed into evidence. But, the judge so far has disagreed and has given them a pretty wide berth in using that evidence.
Fascinating. You would think they're such constitutionalists, that they would take this over to the Supreme Court, but I guess they will, depending on the outcome of the trial. Now, I cut you off. I was talking about did you think they would take this to the Supreme Court?
Oh yeah, they could challenge this type of evidence, through the appellate system, but yeah. I believe the route for that would be that they ultimately would have to go through with the trial and have a disposition before they could challenge it and ask for a retrial based on, this type of evidence. So, certainly that's something that the appellate courts and perhaps even the Supreme Court could weigh in on. But, that's going to be years down the road, assuming that there's a conviction for the Bundys in this case.
Now, it's interesting because in this other article, this Longbow Productions pops up again with this guy who was something about a strip club and a condo project in Colorado. And what's going on with that?
Yeah, so using my masterful investigative skills, when we got this cache of investigative or video and audio from the fake documentary, we found out that this guy's name was Charles Johnson, right? So I just Googled Charles Johnson FBI and thought well, what the hell's going to come up? Probably nothing. And it turned out there was this bizarre story from a local television station in Denver about this guy named Charles Johnson who had been knocking on doors and harassing people, and when he was charged with working as a private investigator without a license, the FBI had sent a letter to the local prosecutors asking them to drop the charges. And the Denver TV station didn't know that Charles Johnson was an FBI agent, didn't know what any of this was about, other than that it was strange that this guy would knock on doors and get arrested and then have the FBI say, hey guys, can you please drop these charges? And so following up on that, thinking maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's not, asked the Glendale police. And Glendale, it's worth noting, is this really tiny town that's it's totally surrounded by the city of Denver. And, historically it was known as kind of a nightlife district. And so I contacted the Glendale police and asked them for, the police report related to the arrest. And so they send me this, 20 or 30 page report that documented their investigation. And then they also noted in their report that there was video from when he was arrested, and that there was this interrogation video, and so I requested that as well. And what was interesting was that in the police report, he had used a business card that identified himself as Charles Johnson, investigative consultant, but it used the same phone number and address as the Longbow Productions office in Nashville, Tennessee. And then in addition, there was this video of his interrogation, and during the documentary filming for the Bundy investigation, Johnson had at various times got himself in front of the camera, so we had images of him as well, and it was clear that it was this same guy. And so what ultimately the FBI was investigating in Colorado is a little unclear. I mean, given the circumstances, it seems that they were investigating some sort of public corruption related to a land deal, and the deal was that there was this rug store on this very premium spot of land that was right near this large-scale development that the city was trying to do to create this project called Glendale 180. It would be like a nightlife district near Glendale, or Cherry Creek is the little waterway that runs through the city. And the city wanted to purchase this land because it was central to their redevelopment project. But the owner wanted to instead build this condo development because he wanted to maximize the value of the land. And there was this little newspaper called the Cherry Creek Chronicle that was running these stories that were like, vehemently opposed to the development, going as far as like referring to it as the Tehranian Death Star, because the guy who owned the land was Iranian. And so then ultimately what Charles Johnson does is he goes into town and he starts knocking on the doors of people who were quoted in the newspaper as opposed to the project, many of whom were actually employees of the local strip club called Shotgun Willie's, which, as it happens, was owned by the mayor's wife. And so this very seemingly incestuous thing was going on. But as Charles Johnson was investigating, he was kind of freaking people out, so they were calling the police. And the local Glendale police end up deciding to run a sting on Charles Johnson. So one of the people that he had contacted was this guy named Doug Stiff, who was a strip club DJ at Shotgun Willie's. And Sean Farley, a detective for the Glendale police, decides that he's going to go undercover and pretend to be Doug's friend. They're going to meet Charles Johnson at a restaurant and talk about what he's trying to do. And that's at that point Charles Johnson said that he was an investigator who'd been hired by a journalist who he wouldn't name, and was there to investigate this apparent condo project. And so they talk to him for an hour, and the Glendale police do their research, and they realize that, basically what he's doing is acting as a private investigator in a state where you need a license to do that. And so he was basically in violation of state law. And they end up arresting him and charging him with that, haul him into an interrogation room, and he's got this really convoluted story about who he is and what he's doing. At the time, he was carrying 3 IDs, one from Hawaii, another from Tennessee, and a third from Florida. And so was doing like things that were highly suspicious to the local police, and so they charge him. And then, of course, he gets released. He was given a notice to appear in court, and that's when the FBI sent a letter to local prosecutors and said, hey, we can't tell you why, but we need you to drop these charges. And the local prosecutors agreed, even though, they certainly weren't compelled to do that. And what was interesting for us was that this all happened, a few months after the fake documentary project had closed. And so it's clear that for whatever reason, Charles Johnson is this undercover agent who is moving from city to city, but that he also continues to use this journalistic cover for his assignments. And, again, another example where this was not a case that involved immediate public safety concerns, for which you might say, okay, well, it's okay that they're posing as journalists. This was just seemingly a standard investigation, and they chose to use a journalistic cover. And so it does suggest that the FBI is using journalistic covers far more often than they've admitted publicly, because these are the cases we know about, but certainly it's reasonable to assume that there are cases that have not been made public where the FBI was using journalistic covers.
Did you ever determine why the FBI was interested in this little condo project in this?
Yeah, so the local newspaper publisher, says that the man who owns the land has connections to the FBI. That's not something that can be proven, and it isn't certainly something I'd endorse.
Yeah.
I suspect that the FBI was investigating possible collusion related to the land deal in some way between the newspaper and the and City Hall. That would be my guess, just based on the people that he contacted. But no charges have been filed. I think it's important to be upfront and say that there's no evidence to suggest that any crime had been committed. It's just that for whatever reason the FBI was investigating this. And then the weird thing too is, like, in my work I talk to a lot of former and current FBI agents, and sometimes on background, and they help me just understand, like, the process or the policies or what an agent might do. And everyone I talked to about what happened in Colorado, they all thought that Charles Johnson must have been acting alone. Like, he must have gone off the reservation, right? Because it was totally against protocol for you to have 3 different IDs on you, right? Like, it's not unusual for an undercover agent to have more than one ID from various states, but you would never carry them all at the same time. They're in your desk at the FBI office, and you pull out the one as necessary. And then the other thing is that it's highly unusual to allow a FBI agent to get arrested. I mean, normally if an FBI agent was arrested and he was undercover, there would have been another agent who was watching what was going on, and he would have stepped up and said, hey, look, you got to stop this. He's an FBI agent. Let me explain. And none of that happened in this case. And so the FBI agents I talked to all speculated that, he must have been off the reservation doing his own thing. But then, as the letter from the FBI suggests, either he was on his own doing his own thing and they decided to cover for him, or he was involved in some sort of investigation, and after he was arrested, the FBI stepped in and asked the prosecutors not to press charges.
Yeah, that sounds plausible. Also, too, on the other hand, too, it's also very unusual because they just passed that law in Colorado where licensing was required, and there was a grace period that went on for a very long time. He was probably the only person in that little town. I'm sure he was the only person ever investigated or arrested for unlicensed PI work in Colorado, which is like jaywalking in Manhattan, okay? So it had to be politically motivated that they got their cop friend, that the topless bar's wife guy, went down there and got her, because the mayor's wife was involved in all this. I'm sure they had some kind of political motivation. Fascinating. That's a fascinating story all by itself.
Yeah, and then I'm sure there's a lot more to it than what we were able to report. It was definitely kind of funny footnote to to the larger Bundy story.
Yeah, and this guy's jeopardizing his big giant Bundy case by walking around with the business card with the address on it.
Right. The other thing that's worth mentioning too is I talked to the lawyers who are representing Bundy and the other defendants, and normally when an FBI agent is involved in any sort of crime, whether it's something that's off duty like a DUI, or something on duty like with Johnson where he was arrested while on official business, that's considered giglio material, which is meant like whenever there's a witness who's provided in a criminal defense, the government is obligated to provide any information that would potentially impeach the witness. So if you're busted for your DUI, that's something that you can bring up in testimony to impeach the witness's credibility. In Johnson's case, he was arrested for practicing as a PI without a license. Even though he wasn't convicted, his arrest is likely, giglio material. And apparently the FBI and the Department of Justice did not turn that over to the lawyers, prosecuting Bundy and the others.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, we talked to the lawyers who were representing Bundy and the others, and they all said that they were unaware of the arrest in Colorado. I mean, we wrote the story, so I mean, clearly they are now, but it is concerning and questionable of why the FBI would not turn that information over. I mean, that is giglio material and seems particularly relevant to the Bundy case in particular, because he was using a journalistic cover, trying to get out from being prosecuted for practicing as a PI without a license by claiming kind of the journalistic exemption, right? Because the PI license law in Colorado, for obvious or for First Amendment reasons, built a carve out for a journalist. So if I, Trevor Aaronson, the journalist, knock on doors in Glendale asking questions, I can't be charged with acting as a private investigator without a license because I'm First Amendment protected under the journalism carve out. And that's what he was trying to do to kind of wiggle out of being arrested by saying, look, I'm an investigator, but I was hired by a journalist. And that after Glendale reviewed the law, I mean, they realized that that was just a way of him trying to wiggle out, and that the law, in their view, covered journalists like me if I were to do it. But if I hired you to investigate as a private investigator or another private investigator, and they weren't licensed in Colorado, and I said, hey, I'll give you $200 if you go around asking these questions, essentially I'm employing you as a private investigator, and you would need to be licensed under Colorado law according to the guidelines or the interpretation that the Glendale police had of the law.
Interesting, too. He had to be acting pretty heavy-handed, too, for so many people to be contacting the police after he contacted them, unless they were all friends of whoever it was who sicked the cops on this guy to begin with. We're almost out of time, and real quick, we talked about the Millers off the air for a couple of minutes. The Millers were that couple. They came down and they were up at Bundy Ranch for a while. And then we uncovered that first they were at the Million Mask March and that they were at the Occupy Wall Street. Then they came here to Nevada, supposedly to follow the career of David Laurie Vanderbeek, who was running for governor here on this party that's affiliated with Jesse Ventura. It's like this fringe party. And they were friends with David Laurie Vanderbeek, and they were friends with Gordon Martinez, who was running for sheriff, and he had a Gordon Martinez for sheriff T-shirt on their YouTube video. And they went up to Bundy Ranch, and then they wound up shooting a couple of the Millers. Did I lose you? I might have lost them. I still see him here. But I think I got an internet glitch. That would suck. Can you hear me? Sometimes. That would suck. I lose them here. Speakers. Are you there now? I lost them. Okay, I'll make another call. Got disconnected by Skype. Sorry about that. But we're talking to Trevor Aaronson, TrevorAaronson.com. Hey, got your back, Trevor?
Yeah, hey, sorry about the audio just dropped off, so sorry about that.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what it was, but it was Skype. So anyway, I was asking you about the Millers. What did you come up with when you were in watching these videos and stuff like that? Did the name of the Millers come up?
Yeah, so I mean, it came up in conversations with the subjects of the interviews and the FBI agents. I mean, I don't think the FBI agents were overly concerned with the Millers, but there was definitely questions that were raised about like who they were and who they were connected to. Burleson, the former FBI informant, mentions them a few times, and so I also think that there was a perception among the FBI that the threat of violence among the supporters for Cliven Bundy was high because of people like the Millers. They thought maybe there were more like them there. It certainly wasn't kind of a large part of their investigation, but from the questions that they answered, it was definitely something that was on their mind.
Fascinating. The whole Miller case is just so bizarre because usually when police are shot here in Vegas, days and days of funerals and memorials and all kind of stuff like that. Nothing like that with this case, and even people who knew the Millers, like I said, David Laurie Vanderbeek that was running for governor and Gordon Martinez that was running for sheriff, were never questioned by the police or the FBI about their association with these two characters. Totally bizarre case. Trevor Aaronson, I can't thank you enough. Next time, anything you ever want to promote or you want to give us recipes, you want to get on the air, call me up, man. I'll put you right on the air. I really, really enjoyed this. The articles here, bizarre story behind the FBI's fake documentary about Bundy family. Excellent. And it's how an undercover FBI agent pretending to be a journalist winds up in jail. TrevorAaronson.com and also The Terror Factory, inside the FBI's manufactured war on terror. Do you want to leave us with anything before you go?
No. I mean, I just really enjoyed the talk, and I appreciate that there's an audience out there for these types of stories.
Oh, yeah, and especially the first show, too. The audience loved it, so I'm sure they're going to love this, too, as well. Thank you, Trevor. Keep in touch, okay?
Yeah, thanks so much, Ed.
Good night.